and please try to remember it. If you recall the layout of the landing corridor from Mount Ararat this way, and Jerusalem as Mission Control Center, the spaceport, the Giza Pyramids, and the place in Lebanon called Baalbek today. These are the 4 space-related sites that if you keep them in mind, you understand what happened afterwards, what happened in recent times, and what the present conflict is all about. When the dust, let's use that expression, the dust of the nuclear explosion and the demise of Sumer settled, several hundred years later, when perhaps passage was possible again after the use of nuclear weapons here, a major event took place. It is called the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. And the Bible says that after about 400 years, God remembered. He said, oh, by the way, I forgot all about those people. There was this guy, Abraham, and I promised him a certain land, the promised land. I made a covenant with him. And then I forgot all about it. But now it's time to fulfill my promises. And the Israelites left Egypt, and I didn't write it yet in any of my books, but I can tell you now that if I ever do, I will tell you that the starting point of the Exodus was the Sphinx, because the Sphinx gazes precisely along the 30th parallel towards the spaceport. There was, of course, no more spaceport there, but the mountains remained, and the mountain which held the various facilities was there, and the Bible calls it Mount Sinai, the mount in the Sinai Peninsula, Har Elohim, the mountain of the gods, of the Anunnaki. So they were sent here on this Exodus to resume the relationship, the commandments, etc., which required for them to proceed to accept all the moral teachings of the Sumerians. I think in my very first book, The 12th Planet, when I talk about the Sumerian law codes, I say everybody, most people know about the ancient law codes. Hammurabi, the Babylonian king, his law code, which is on a stone block in the Louvre in Paris, is a code of crime and punishment. It says, if you did this, that's your punishment. The Sumerian law codes, and there's one, for example, by a king 1,000 years before Hammurabi, 1,400 years before Hammurabi, that was a law code of justice that said you shall not take away the donkey of a widow. You shall not delay the wages of a day laborer. Those were the Sumerian law codes. So these were the Sumerian commandments, the Sumerian moral laws that had to be reaccepted, renegotiated at Mount Sinai. And once they were, they had to continue. There was difficulty in going straight. They went around, but anyway, finally they got to Jerusalem. And what did they do once they got to Jerusalem? They built the temple to Yahweh on a platform that existed there. And if you have not done it yet, I urge you to go to Jerusalem, because along the Western Wall, this of course doesn't exist anymore. This is now replaced by a Muslim structure. Along this Western Wall, just as along the Western Wall in Baalbek, in the landing place of Gilgamesh, and this is an aerial photograph. This is the area that's called the Temple Mount. And this is where the temple stood, and the Holy of Holies, and the Ark of the Covenant. Interestingly enough, that I noticed when I was there and when looking at there are trees everywhere, but not here. Nothing grows here. So this is the western wall, and an opening was made along the western wall after being blocked for thousands of years. And what was discovered there is mind-boggling, because in the same place, the western wall, as in the landing place where Gilgamesh went, there is a trilithon, not of 1,100,000 tons, but only 600 or 700 tons, 3 immense stone blocks lying one next to the other, just as there. And somewhere there, there is a sign that says that this is exactly where a tunnel leads to the Holy of Holies above the platform. This is another shot of the trilithon in Jerusalem. Now, when Yahweh, the God of the Bible, commanded David and then Solomon to build a temple exactly on a pre-existing platform, this is what he said. These are exact words in translation. And I cannot read from this angle. Will anybody read out loud, please?
Thus has said the Lord Yahweh, this
Right.
is Jerusalem. In the midst of the nations I placed her, and all the lands are in a circle round about her.
Well, in the midst of the nations, in the center of the circles. Well, that could not be more explicit that this is the layout of the Mission Control Center. Now, at about the time that the Hebrews, the Israelites, were restoring the platform in Jerusalem, other things were happening in the adjoining countries, especially those countries that followed Marduk, the Babylonian one. In Babylonia, on cylinder seals, the sign of the cross began to appear. In Assyria, the kings began to wear the sign of the cross on their chest. The same happened in Egypt. Now, these are all from around 1000 BC, 900 BC, 800 BC, 700 BC. Now, what does it mean? What does it signify? Well, the sign of the cross, it may come as a surprise to my Christian friends. The sign of the cross is not a new sign, and not a sign developed or invented at the time of Jesus. This is a very ancient Sumerian sign, and each time that the planet Nibiru, that usually was depicted as a winged disk, was on its way back to our vicinity, each time that the reappearance of Nibiru was expected, the depiction, the symbolism for Nibiru, for the planet, changed from the winged disk to the cross. So this one, for example, this is one of the most ancient ones. This is another one. This is when agriculture was granted to mankind, and so on. And if you look at the orbit of Nibiru, roughly 3,600 years, in my book, The End of Days, I explain why the orbit might have become a little shorter, only 3,450 years. But anyway, we can work with this 3,600, which is a good round number, and part of the sexagesimal system, 6, 10, 63, 63,600. So from the time that Nibiru was in our vicinity, making the great round around the sun, which is called the perigee, the point closest to the sun, he goes out, slows down, reaches this point, the apogee, and then starts on its way back. So at some point, the planet is here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or here, and at some point, the anticipation of its return begins. And that, I suggest, is when the sign of the cross began to reappear. In one of my books, The Wars of Gods and Men, I deal with all the various wars that took place, not only the very early ones, but in particular the ones that started to become more frequent and more ferocious as the return of Nibiru became closer and closer. It seems as if it became much more important who would be in control, who would welcome them, whose particular aspect of religion would be more predominant, etc. And it was at that time, precisely around 750 BC, that the biblical prophecies also started. They started with the prophet Amos around 750 BC. Now, in general, no distinction is made by people writing on the subject, and most of whom really don't know Hebrew, so they rely on translations. The whole thing, biblical prophecy, is taken as as one lump subject. But if you know Hebrew, and if you study the various prophecies in great detail, and know the precision of the Hebrew language, you begin to see that the prophets were really talking about two different things. One was called the Day of the Lord, and Amos spoke about it. Another, I think, I quote Habakkuk, I can't see from this angle. Anyway, they started to talk about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is coming. The day of the Lord is near. And it was described as a time of celestial phenomena. There would be darkness at noon. You will not be able to see the stars at night. The moon will not shine its light, etc. and so on and so forth. I don't know if it's easy for you. I had about 30 slides with all these biblical quotations, but I realized that it was very difficult even for the audience to read them. So at the same time, similar prophecies known as Akkadian prophecies, Assyrian prophecies, Babylonian prophecies began to also talk about the return, the celestial Lord would come from the south, would be first seen in this constellation and so on. And I drew some of these charts to show you and show how you can relate some of the text to the progress of Nibiru coming back to Earth's vicinity. This is another sketch that really renders as a sketch literal wording, saying you first can see it from there, then you can see it here, and so on and so forth as the planet returns. There were even discoveries of astronomical records. These are called astrolabes because they